Cool. Hello, everybody who is watching this video. We are probably going to go through a format where I basically just do some talks, recording. I don't think we'll get a lot of live people at this time. Historically, I guess we haven't really had many live people this time, maybe one or two, which is fine because I'm just going to go ahead and just go through these talks and hopefully everybody can get something out of this. So last week we had talked about, if you, I'm referencing the video actually 2 weeks ago about practical object-oriented design, and talked about some basics that the book kind of covers. I had mentioned that the book helped me get to a point where I could get past a programming wall and understanding more concepts within Ruby and object-oriented design as a whole. So I mentioned chapter 9 of that book, the POODR book, is all about testing. And not only is it about testing, it's about intentional testing, which is even better. But I will mention that when I get there. Just need to make sure. Oh, sorry. Yep. So just throwing this out there also, that's my information. My Twitter handle, if you guys are interested in following me, that's my information. If you want to chat about stuff that's on Ruby, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Mainly, I've been focusing a lot more on JavaScript. So if you guys also know JavaScript and you're a Ruby newbie, maybe we can do some sort of a bargaining system where you teach me JavaScript and I'll pair with you on Ruby. Yeah, or if not, that's fine. So Ruby Newbies is a site that I've kind of created in response to these videos. I had a lot of times I'd just start shooting out links in the beginning of every single video. So I thought, since I'm learning web development, I might as well make a website. So that's what that is, rubynewbies.org. It's open source. You can fork it on GitHub. There's some issues that I'm kind of working on. I do have a lot of time that's going to be freed up this weekend. So I plan on getting a lot of stuff web development-wise this weekend done. For one, I'm actually going to be creating a blog for the Ruby Newbies. Some of you guys already know that I've been doing a blog since a year ago this week, and been putting on some small little tips on Ruby, and I'm going to be migrating those tips to the Ruby Newbies site, and then continuing the blogging on that site, as well as my personal blog, which would be more of my personal story. So rather than blending those two, I'm actually going to separate them in a separate blog format. Also got some other things I haven't created issues for. But if you guys want to chat about it or talk about what you think maybe the site could be, I'm more than happy. This is it's my personal project, but I'm more than happy to open it up to anybody else who wants to contribute. Just about anything that you kind of showed out there, I will probably agree to do, unless it's something crazy like switching to Python or something. So what to expect? We're going to talk about why should I test, what do I test, and how do I test. Those are 3 questions that a lot of people get when you first start testing. I also threw a question out there for the Code Newbie discourse page, which I'll show you later. I'll shout out to them at the end. But just trying to figure out, what are some hindrances for us not testing? I know when I first started testing, or when I first started Ruby, I just avoided testing just because I knew it was hard. I knew of testing. I learned the syntax of it. I learned RSpec, but I just avoided actually testing in my Rails apps because it just was hard. Once you have a blank screen and you're ready to start writing code, it's a lot easier to write code than write test. But I think as you get more practice, it actually is easier writing a test first. And I'll show that later in a later slide. So this is the book that we were talking about. Again, this is chapter 9, which is intentional testing. And yeah, so chapter 9 talked about testing, and it's talking about like testing for a purpose, not just testing for testing. Now, that idea of intentional testing kind of conflicts with another book I want to recommend, which is What Do I Test? Which I'll have at the end. I'll have the name for you if you want to screenshot and search it. I think if you actually Google it, that book will come up first, because I think that's the reason why Eric Steele wrote the book, is because when he did Google that, he didn't get any results. So he wrote a book with that same Google search query that he used. But yeah, but I'll talk about the conflicts and a later slide on that with intentional testing. Just know that intentional testing is all about testing with a purpose, not just testing around. I know a lot of times we do something locally called the Ruby Dojo, which is locally in Orlando, and we'll do TDD starting with a problem. And a lot of times we'll start with a problem and we start with tests. We force ourselves to do tests, but we ended up testing circles around the same thing. So we'll be testing the same random attribute over and over for no reason. We just keep testing. So it's a lot of duplication. So Sandy Metz in this book mentions, try to avoid the duplication of the test. If you're expecting 1 + 1 to equal 2 and expecting 1 + 1 not to equal 2, that should be enough for testing. You shouldn't be testing anything else unless there's some sort of edge case if you wanted to test floats. But again, I'm just rambling. Just limiting duplication is what intentional testing is all about. So first question, why should I test? Because you should. So writing is easier when you don't test. Writing code, rather. Proofreading my notes. So writing code is easier when you don't test at first, but maintaining code is harder when you don't test. There's a quote that I heard in a meetup a month ago. So, and I thought it was very fitting, especially for code newbies. Ruby newbies. I'm mixing two different things, but still. So testing is like brushing your teeth. When you are younger, testing like brushing your teeth. When you're younger, you don't ever want to do it. But when you're older, you appreciate it. And that's very much true. When I first started programming, I didn't really see the need to test or feel like I wanted to. But when about 6 months later, less than that, 4 months later after starting my first app, my first full featured app, I went back and had hardly any tests. I had very few tests, and I went back and ended up rewriting a lot of tests and adding tests to my application because I just had a blank slate and I didn't know where to start or where to start implementing better code because I walked away from the application in order to move 100 miles to a new city. So I just didn't have time to continue to put more development into that actual app. But when I did have time, I had to start from scratch with no documentation or what my ideas were. I didn't write much down. Most of the code I wrote was just kind of off the fly. When I thought of something, I'd just work on that. But there's some key things that testing provides you, which is one, finding bugs. So if there's something wrong in your application, or just if you have a known bug, it's easy to write a test to reproduce that bug in a test in order to find out the fix for it. Vice versa, if you have good code and potentially you could have a bug, the test will actually alert you of the bug beforehand, before a user actually you. Another thing is providing documentation. One of the best things that I've noticed when joining a team with already established code is having tests makes it a lot easier to understand what certain methods or things are supposed to do. Tests just kind of lay out what the functionality app is, what's meant for the functionality in the app. So that's why tests are highly recommended to be provided when you start an app, especially in the beginning, when you don't have a clear path of which way you're going. Sometimes when you might even change the path of your application. I just recently tried to write some code to find prime numbers. I think it was something with prime numbers and the output of the prime numbers. And as a group, we had in the Ruby Dojo, we actually started towards a certain path, but ended up veering off to an entirely different path once we found out that the code that we wrote didn't scale to numbers outside of 10,000. So I don't have any examples to show you, but just know that it helps to provide a guidance as you write code. Number three, not really a big thing, but tests also support abstractions. So abstractions being if you're going to have a program, you're probably going to have more than one file. So if you have two different objects, or if you need two objects to talk to each other, if you remember from the last video, I recommend watching that. It's probably about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We talked about all about messages between objects, and those different messages can be abstracted. So you don't want to have two different classes within one file. because then this kind of gets a little confusing, and then you're scrolling from lines and lines of code to try to figure out what's going on. You're going to have those files in different separate file formats in files. Sorry, those separate classes in different files. So that helps support that abstraction of having different methods and different files to be able to talk to each other. Yeah, and for more information, that I recommend checking out the Well-Grounded Rubyist on that. I did quite a few videos, 4 videos on that book. So check that out. Next, the module section would probably be the best to explain that. So before we go to the other questions, we've got to get out of the, we've got to answer the question, RSpec or Minitest. So RSpec and Minitest are both DSLs for testing. It just provides the syntax to be able to write tests to prove that your code works. Now, most people will probably have heard of both of them. If you haven't heard of any of them, then good for you. But I'll explain real quick. RSpec is, the difference is RSpec is definitely more community driven. You'll find most Rails and Ruby developers actually use RSpec and swear by it. Syntactically, it's a beautiful way to write your test. As you see the example, you expect name to equal Brian. But then that's also the downfall. There's a bit of a learning curve to learn the syntax of RSpec, because RSpec doesn't follow the same syntaxes as Ruby. So it gets kind of confusing to understand when to put expect, where to pass your methods, how to create objects or factories off the fly, or stubs off the fly in RSpec. But once you learn it, you kind of get it, and then it hasn't really changed. Even from 2.0 to 3.0 for RSpec, there hasn't been tons of changes that you'll be completely lost. So it just has a learning curve, but if there's definitely a bigger community for RSpec. The other testing framework being Minitest. I did put in test unit. If you're using test unit or you're reading a tutorial that has test unit in it, more than likely it's a little out of date, because Minitest is the new replacement for test unit, which with Minitest is a lot of RSpec niceties that are included in Minitest. But Minitest is quite a bit different from RSpec still, because rather than using factories, which are, sorry, I didn't explain factories. Actually, I didn't explain factories at all in this entire testing presentation, but factories is just kind of a way to create fake objects for yourself to test. So rather than relying on real data, you can create order to recreate bugs or reproduce errors. But Minitest, they call them fixtures. Same thing, just slight difference in the syntax and the way it's used. But we won't get into that. A book I recommend, What Do I Test, actually goes in more detail on that. So I recommend that. But Minitest is one thing that's different, is that Minitest is included within the Ruby library. So all you need to do is require Minitest or add Minitest. Don't even think you need to even add Minitest to your gem file in a Rails app. I still do, because I'm so used to test unit being the main thing. So I used to require Minitest a lot. But I highly recommend, I highly recommend you trying out both of them. I really think that RSpec and Minitest have benefits on both ends. I actually personally, I like Minitest at the moment. I'm liking it more. But I also have apps that are written with RSpec. I like the idea of having apps in both languages, just because I want to keep up the speed on both of them. But at the moment, I am enjoying Minitest, and that's what we're using here at IZEA on a day-to-day. So it just makes it easier just to keep consistent with what I'm using, so that way I don't have to go crazy on the syntax. But we are doing RSpec in the Ruby Dojo, so I still get some exposure with that and learning some new concepts in that. So moving on to the next slide, what do I test? So I've got here a slide that just shows a different syntax, starting with a test for validity on an object. So I've got this presentation object, which is this in a class. If you see there, it's got one attribute, presenter, and it's validating the presence of presenter. So first things I always do is test the validity. So If you look at the RSpec example and the mini test example, that's usually the first example, first test that I usually write when I create a new object is assert the presentation is valid. And then I start writing some validations. If you see above, validate presence of, I'll start writing validations similar to that. Different types of validations. If it's integer, then I'll validate that the integer is over 0. I'll validate it's not negative. Yeah, just simple things, and it's easy enough to just Google different validations and then write tests for them. And you could even find most people start with validations too, so you'll find even validations that are already pre-written. They even just copy, not copy and paste, but you can copy by typing from other sites. So my recommendation, if you have no idea what to test first, test the validations. Make sure that your objects are valid and that they are expecting to do what you think they're going to do. With that being said, here are more things to test. So just like the last video I did, testing messages is a good thing to test. Objects talking is actually inputting and outputting different messages. Test what the expectation is. So if you look at below, it's this soda machine class. If you insert money, it should output a soda. And if you test that, I use a refute, which is I just went with the mini test. I didn't do an RSpec example just for space on the slide. But if you refute that the soda machine, if you insert a shoe, you should it should be false, and it returns true. Sorry, I got that backwards. So what I was trying to get at is that no matter what you input into the insert, it should return a soda. So that's a bug in my application, and I was trying to, by refuting it, it should, it does return false. See, if I wrote assert, it probably would make more sense. I'm confusing myself. So let me just, so we're expecting the assert to return false, but it actually returns true. So I'm just going to flip this around. Yep. So yeah, this will actually return true. And that's because I didn't write any code to actually handle that money object that's coming in to make sure if it is money, then return soda, else return error. So yeah, the simple things like that, if I wrote that and got that passing every single time and then moved on to another class or some other part of my soda machine, I would never know that people were inserting shoes into my soda machine because I never wrote a test for it that actually properly knew about this. So having this assert and knowing that message, whatever the output is supposed to be, that it helps me to understand my application even better. Finally, moving on, should I TDD or not? It's a great question. A lot of people, most people were, actually, even when I first started, there was a big talk about TDD. Even just, 4 months ago, there was a big talk about TDD and whether, after RailsConf, whether it was a big deal or whether you should TDD or not. The answer is yes and no, and that's my answer. This is not a hard, fast rule, but I recommend TDD because it helps you provide a great foundation on learning how to test, and it forces you to test. It's definitely very hard as a beginner, though, the TDD. So I also offer the leeway of not doing TDD. But my recommendation is to write tests, whether it's before or after. Having one test is better than no test. Having too many tests is better than having no tests. So I highly recommend learning testing and learning testing early. Learn enough programming that you can actually make simple things, but I would recommend learning testing very early. Testing is a very easy way to set yourself apart from other people who are competing for the same jobs you are, because more than likely, if you're learning on your own, you're probably not testing. Even some of these boot camps actually avoid testing until the very end, which is unfortunate because testing is very useful and can be used earlier on than at the end of a 12-week program. So the final question, how should I test? So once you decided to test and whether it's TDD or not, just write tests. get in the habit early. I recommend going again with the validity, just writing if it's .valid, if it returns true. It's easy to look up some syntax to find out how to write specific tests and the syntactically within the DSL of Architect or any test, but I just recommend just doing it. Also, I highly recommend not getting stuck into all the extra testing tools that are out there. For being like, there's some different gems you can put in that will run your test automatically, or make your test perfect colors and stuff like that, and add extra documentation. Some of those stuff is good, but if it takes you longer to set that stuff up, I recommend just avoiding using it. Learn how to add all that stuff, but I recommend avoid using that in the beginning. Just write test. That's my biggest pet peeve, is just doing stuff. That's one reason why I write a blog post. At least my goal was 3 times a week, but I've kind of scaled down to once a week now. Kind of picking it back up now. But yeah, if I spent all my time trying to build a blog like I'm doing with the Ruby Newbies, I would spend more time maintaining that than actually writing blog posts. So just keep that in mind. If you're just trying to add more gems for the sake of adding more gems, or adding more little testing trickeries, then you're probably not writing that many tests. And I just recommend writing tests. So that being said, we're done here. That's my name. That's the site. We are now going to move weekly. Whether anybody shows or not, I'm actually going to practice on doing more TDD. I'm actually doing a lot more of it as of late, and want to continue that route. So if anybody wants to learn TDD, you're more than welcome to join me. I do recommend downloading Cloud9 if you go to c9.io. Sign up for an account. It's a very easy way for us to TDD. Though I'm not 100% sure if we're going to do it this time. I might do it at night meeting, do some group work. I tend to get a lot more people ready and available at night. So for the benefit of some people who can't make it at my lunchtime, I will probably make this a night event, but on a bi-weekly basis. So technically we will be weekly for the Ruby Newbies, but we just won't be at the same time every week. Hopefully that won't be confusing. If it is, reach out to me. If you got a proposed time, let me know. But I'm guessing it's probably going to be around 9, 10 o'clock Eastern PM. Yeah, so that's it. If you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. Fork the EA page on GitHub if you want to change something. There's a spelling error on the page or anything. Feel free to reach out. And I think that is it. So yeah, if you guys... Yeah, actually, let me just go ahead and end it there. All right, guys, you have a good week. Bye.